Welcome to Zigmatech Learninghub. I will be your instructor for agricultural science. For this class, we are going to be taking our exercises from the Examguide app. If you don't have the application already installed on your device, I will want you to download the app in order to follow along in this class. Examguide is the leading educational app that helps students prepare adequately for various exams like UTME, post-UTME, WAEC, GCE, KCPE, IJMB, JUPEB, Cowbellpedia, BECE, JSCE, NCEE, NECO, to mention a few. You can download the app from www.examguide.com or Google Play Store. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to be updated on new videos. Ready for today's class? Okay, let's get started. Soil is the most important asset of a farmer. He will do everything to protect and preserve this asset. Some natural agents do cause some form of degradation to the soil, which include the washing away of the topsoil. Some of these agents include water, wind, and ice, also called glacier. The action of these agents is called erosion. In this lesson, we will discuss more about soil erosion. So our topic for today is soil erosion. And by the end of this lesson, you should be able to state or know the meaning of soil erosion. You should also be able to understand the causes of soil erosion. You should know the factors governing the magnitude of erosion, and also know the agents of soil erosion. You should also know the types of erosion. And finally, you should also understand how to control soil erosion. Let's start by looking at the meaning of erosion. What is soil erosion? Soil erosion is the removal of the topsoil particles from a region of the soil, usually by the action of agents of erosion. And these agents of erosion are water and wind. So the action of water and wind causes the topsoil to be removed. So that is what erosion or soil erosion means. Now this causes a lot of problems, and some of these problems include the damage to the ecosystem and also outright loss of soil. Now what's the ecosystem? Is a community of plants and animals interacting with themselves and with their non-living environment. So erosion can cause a damage to the ecosystem. So let's look at the causes of soil erosion. One of the causes of soil erosion is called deforestation. And you can hear the word there is forest, but we're talking about deforestation. Now, this has to do with the cutting down of forest trees. And as a result of these trees usually have what is called a canopy, which is like a top coverage where they branch out from the trunk. That coverage is called, or that top part is called the canopy. So once these leaf canopies are no longer present due to deforestation, it will now expose the soil to rain, and this can cause the washing away of the topsoil into rivers. We also have poor farming. There are some poor farming techniques that can also lead to soil erosion. Now, plowing has to do with the breaking up of the soil in order to loosening up of the soil or breaking up of the soil in order to make ridges, or to harrow it, then to make ridges. Now this activity can also destroy the natural structure, the soil structure. And as a result of this farming activity, which is plowing, this loosened soil can now be blown away by wind as dust. So you can see that picture shows plowing taking place and how the soil is being blown away by wind. And if it's on a slopy ground, this can now lead to the soil being eroded by water. We have overgrazing as another cause of soil erosion. Now, grazing has to do with animals feeding on forage and, on a particular plot of land, and on pasture. Pasture has to do with the land. Now, if animals are grazing, because of their hoofs, you know, and the weight of these animals, it could cause the soil to be compacted, to become compact, you know, making it form hard, compacted particles as a result of the grazing of these animals. Remember, these animals have weight and they have hoofs on their limbs. And so, especially if we're talking about overgrazing, especially if the stocking rate is higher than what is required, that the carrying capacity of that particular land, you'll find that overgrazing will take place, and this causes the soil to become compacted. And as a result of this, there's less absorption of rain. And once there's less absorption of rain, the soil could quickly dry up. And once they quickly dry up, they will eventually be blown away. So that's another cause of soil erosion, overgrazing. Now this picture helps us to understand overgrazing. You can see sustainable grazing, that first picture A. Picture B, I talked about overstocking, when the carrying capacity of the land, the animals grazing are much more than the carrying capacity of the land. This could now lead to compaction of the soil, and the outcome is in the picture below, where erosion now starts taking place, where water is not properly absorbed, and as a result of this, the subsoil starts washing away. We have the activities of man as another cause of soil erosion. Now, there are certain land use practices that can lead to the destruction of the soil structure. Also, poorly managed constructions. Once some constructions are not properly done or poorly managed, that could damage the soil structure and thereby expose the soil to the agents of erosion. And the agents of erosion here are water and wind. So let's look at the factors governing the magnitude of erosion. Magnitude in this case is the degree to which erosion takes place. There are certain factors that govern or control the degree to which erosion takes place. And these factors include the physical nature of the soil, the slope of the land, the volume and distribution of rainfall, the forces or the force of wind, which is also known as windstorm, and the amount of vegetative cover. So these factors can have an impact or determine the level at which erosion takes place. Starting with the physical nature of the soil, sandy soil, we have different types of soil. We have sand soil, we have clay soil, we also have silt. But looking at sandy soil, a sandy soil will easily be removed more rapidly as compared to a clay soil, which is usually compact because it has tiny pore spaces, so it can retain water more, as compared to a sandy soil that has large pore spaces, so it will not retain water easily, so it can easily dry up. And as a result of this, sandy soil can easily be removed more rapidly as when you compare it to clay soils, which will not be easily eroded or removed. The slope of the land can also be another factor that determines the magnitude of erosion. So if a land has a long slope, the amount of soil that will be lost will be greater as compared to a land that has a shorter slope. We also have the volume and distribution of rainfall. So when the rain is heavy, the water will usually accumulate on the surface of the soil. And when water accumulates on the surface of the soil, if the rate of percolation, and now what is percolation? This has to do with the downward movement of water into the soil, which we can also call absorption. So when water accumulates on the soil surface, if the rate of percolation is slower than the rate of accumulation, the accumulated water will now rush down the soil or the land, especially if the area is slopey. We have force of wind as another factor that governs the magnitude of erosion. So force of wind, which is also known as windstorm, is another factor. Now in desert areas and certain areas where there are low rainfall, we find out that there will be high winds in such areas, and this can cause or is a major cause of erosion in such environment or such areas. So the topsoil will easily be carried away over distances of hundreds of kilometers as a result of windstorms. We also have the amount of vegetative cover. Now, vegetative cover, we're talking about grasses, growing on an area of land, or trees as well. So when we have an area that is actually covered with a lot of grasses or trees will experience less erosion. But an area that has fewer trees or grasses is prone to a higher level of erosion. Remember, we're talking about factors that govern the magnitude. That's the level of erosion that takes place in a particular place. So the amount of vegetative cover, if there's enough vegetative cover, such as grasses and trees, there will be less severe soil erosion in such an environment. Now let's look at the forms of erosion. We have different forms of erosion. Now, of the two forms of erosion, we have water and wind erosion. Water is the most serious of these two forms of erosion, and we have different types of water erosion. We have what is called sheet erosion. We also have what is called splash or raindrop erosion. We have the real erosion, which is also called streamlets. We also have the gully erosion. We also have the gully erosion. Now let's look at sheet erosion. What is sheet erosion? Now this occurs when the soil does not easily absorb water. And as a result of this, the runoff water, that's the water that is accumulated on top of the soil, washes away the surface of the soil, thereby leaving stones and pebbles exposed. Now, this type of erosion occurs in thickly populated and heavily cultivated areas, and the effect is not very easily noticed. So that is what sheet erosion is. We also have, this picture shows us how you can see the pebbles, the stones that are exposed. So this is a picture of sheet erosion. We also have splash or raindrop erosion. Now, this is the removal of the topsoil from a small area due to the forceful fall of rain. So from the name raindrop erosion, you can see that it's caused by the forceful fall of rain. And as a result of this, the soil particles are scattered. Well, the soil particles that are scattered will now become blocked. That's the soil pores within these soil particles become blocked. And this will prevent percolation, which is also known as absorption of water into the soil, and that will now lead to what is called raindrop or splash erosion. That picture, you can see the picture describing the raindrop or splash erosion. We have another type of erosion called real erosion, which is also known as streamlets erosion. Now, this occurs when the rain drops on the surface of the soil, and as the rain drops on the surface of the soil, there's a gradual removal of the topsoil along narrow tracks or channels that have already existed or are caused by the rain itself. So you can see the narrow tracks or channels in that picture. When you see this type of situation or washing away of the topsoil in this kind of situation, you know that this is called real erosion or streamlets. This is another picture showing real erosion or streamlet erosion. We have gully erosion as another type of water erosion. Now, this also occurs when the rain does not sink into the soil and part of it runs over the land surface, causing the removal of the particles along its way. Now, this continuous removal of the particles or the soil particles along its way results in the cutting of narrow ditch or a narrow ditch, which will gradually be deepening and widening as the water flows. And as the water flows, these ditches are getting wider and deeper until they finally become deep trenches, which are now called gullies. So that's why it's called gully erosion. So this is a picture. You can see how gully erosion looks. It's getting deeper. The trenches are becoming deeper and wider, forming gullies there. So this picture helps us to understand how gully erosion takes place or how it looks. This is another picture showing gully erosion. You can see the trench is getting deeper and wider. Wind erosion, which is another type of erosion, another form of erosion, now occurs due to the absence of vegetative cover on land. So vegetative cover helps to reduce the effect of wind erosion. So once there's absence of vegetative cover on land, wind erosion is most likely to take place. Now, wind may move these particles in 3 ways. That's the soil particles may be moved by wind in 3 ways. And we have suspension, saltation, and creep. These are the 3 ways by which soil particles in wind erosion is moved. Starting with suspension. Now, this is the process whereby light soil particles are blown by the wind miles away from the its original place. So this picture helps us to see how suspension takes place. You can see the light soil particles, how they are blown away by the wind miles away from their original place. We also have saltation, which is another way by which wind erosion takes place. You can see in this case, strong winds move in wheels, such as funnels, and it throws heavy soil particles into the atmosphere. Now, these heavy soil particles are thrown into the atmosphere, and when they get to the ground, they break and move some distances away from their original place. So that's saltation. The picture helps us to understand how saltation also takes place. Then we have soil creep. Now, this has to do with the movement of large particles of soil on bare land by strong winds or gravity a little distance from their original place. So that picture shows you how soil creep takes place in wind erosion. Now, let's look at how we can prevent and control soil erosion or prevent and control erosion. We have 3 methods by which we can control erosion or by which we can prevent and control erosion. We have the cultural method, we have the scientific method, and we have the mechanical method. So these are 3 methods by which we can control erosion. Starting with the cultural method, there are several ways we can control prevent and control erosion using the cultural method. We have vegetative cover, we have organic matter, we have mulching, we also have avoidance of bush burning, and also avoidance of excessive grazing. So once you use these methods, we are talking about a cultural method of controlling or preventing erosion. Starting with vegetative cover, this has to do with the planting of cover crops. And these cover crops include crops like peas or beans. And with the planting of these cover crops, erosion is being able to be minimized. One is able to minimize erosion as a result of these cover crops. So the picture helps us to see how cover crops are planted, and this can help to minimize erosion because of the impact of raindrops can be controlled as a result of this. We also have organic matter, which is another cultural method of controlling and preventing erosion. Now, this helps to make the soil more cohesive as it binds the soil particles together, more cohesive, and also allows more water absorption. You can find that with the organic matter present, the water is being able to be absorbed. That means percolation takes place better with the presence of organic matter, and this will help to reduce the rate of runoff. So that's organic matter as a cultural method of preventing and controlling erosion. We have mulching, and what is mulching? This has to do with the spreading of grass or some other materials like polythene on the surface of the soil. This can help to prevent raindrops from hitting directly on the soil. And once this prevents raindrops from hitting directly on the soil, it will now enable more of the water to percolate into the soil. And percolation has to do with the downward movement or the absorption of water into the soil. That's another method of preventing and controlling erosion using the cultural method. We have avoidance of bush burning as another cultural method. Now, bush burning now destroys the vegetative cover on the land. This has to do with killing of trees and grasses as a result of fire, and these grasses and trees serve as ground cover. So this exposes the land to the impact of wind, exposes the land or the soil to the impact of raindrops, and this can cause erosion. So we need to avoid bush burning in order to prevent and control erosion. Avoidance of overgrazing. Now, this also has to do with when the land, the stocking rate of the land is not observed, where the animals graze, feed on so much, that the amount of animals, grazing animals on the land is more than the carrying capacity of that land, and so the cattle or the grazing animals end up eating up all the vegetation, which serves as a cover to the soil, thereby exposing the soil surface, which now leads to erosion. So we need to avoid excessive grazing or avoid overgrazing in order to prevent and control erosion. This is also a cultural method. Now let's look at the scientific method. Here we have what is called terracing, contour bond or contour plowing. We also have strip cropping, we have ridges, and we also have windbreaks or shelter belts. These are methods that are called scientific methods of preventing and controlling erosion. Now, starting with terracing, now this has to do with the construction of a series of wide steps down the slope of a hill or hills to prevent erosion. Now this picture helps us to understand how terracing takes place. You can see how the steps have been created, and with these steps, erosion is being controlled. It's a scientific method and it's called terracing. Here the farmer alters the shape of the slope to produce flat areas. So the picture helps us to understand terracing better. We also have contour bonds or contour plowing. Now this has to do with making of ridges across the slope. The picture also helps us to understand. From that picture you can see the slope, you can see the contour. So when you make ridges across the slope, it's called contour bond or plowing, and it can also help to retain water in the furrows, which are the spaces between each ridges. That's the furrow, and that can help to prevent erosion. This picture also helps us to understand how contour bond or contour plowing is done or takes place. So still talking about this contour boring and terracing, this picture just helps us to see the differences between the observable difference between contour plowing and terracing. Ridges is another scientific method used to control and to prevent erosion. So when you make ridges on the field, it can control erosion by reducing the speed of runoff water. We also have strip cropping. Now, what is strip cropping? This has to do with the planting of crops in strips or stripes on the land. That strips, if you have a shirt, shirts that has stripes, it gives you a picture of what strip cropping looks like. But I'll show you a picture that will help you to understand better what strip cropping looks like. So this has to do with 2 or more crops planted alternately on the field. It also is a scientific method of controlling or preventing erosion. Now you can see this picture shows you how strip cropping looks like. We have buffer strip cropping, contour strip cropping, field strip cropping, but all of them has to do with planting of 2 or more crops alternatively on the land. This helps to control erosion as another scientific method of controlling erosion. Windbreaks or shelter belts is another method of preventing and controlling erosion. Now this has to do with the planting of a line of trees or shrubs, and this helps to reduce the velocity of wind. And remember, erosion, we have wind erosion, we have water erosion, so this can help to control wind erosion. So you can see the line of trees in that picture, how they are planted, and this can help to reduce the velocity of wind, thereby reducing erosion. Mechanical method of preventing and controlling erosion. Now, this has to do with the use of structures of one kind or the other, which are applied to areas that have eroded beyond the stage where the use of vegetative cover alone is adequate. So where you cannot, the soil has been washed away to an extent that if you use vegetative cover, it's no longer adequate. So we have to use other methods, and this method now falls under what is called mechanical method. And this method, we're talking about dams. Terraces too is also a mechanical method, and diversion ditches. Now, these dams can be constructed by the farmers from rocks. So you can see the picture of a small check dam used as a mechanical method to control erosion. Terracing also is a mechanical method to control erosion. And we also have diversion ditches. This helps to also control erosion. Okay, so in this lesson, we defined soil erosion as the removal of topsoil particles from a region of the soil, usually by the action of agents of erosion. And these agents of erosion are water and wind. We also looked at the causes of erosion, which include deforestation, poor farming practices, overgrazing, and the activities of man. And we also looked at the rate of erosion, which depends on certain factors, which include the physical nature of the soil, the slope of the land, the volume and distribution of rainfall, the force of wind or wind cover, and the vegetative cover as well. Sorry, force of wind and windstorm, then we also looked at vegetative cover. We looked at two forms of erosion, which has to do with water and wind. And we said water is the most serious. And here they have different types of water erosion. We have the sheet erosion, the splash or raindrop erosion, the real erosion of streamlets. We also have the gully erosion. And we looked at the way wind moves soil particles, which include suspension, saltation, and soil creep. Then we also look at the methods by which we can prevent and control erosion, which can be done using the cultural method, the scientific method, and the mechanical method. So let's take a look at some questions using our exam guide concerning this topic. Okay. This question says soil erosion is caused by water can be controlled by, we have A, overgrazing and bush burning, B, plowing and harrowing, C, land clearing and stumping, D, afforestation and erection of bonds. So of course, overgrazing cannot control erosion. Plowing and harrowing can also not control water erosion. Land clearing and stumping. And the last we have is afforestation, which has to be planting of trees, and the erection of bonds. So that's the answer. The answer is D. Number 17 says, which of the following farming practices encourages soil degradation? A, fertilizer application, bush burning, C, cover cropping, D, fungicide application. Fertilizer application will not encourage soil degradation, but bush burning will, cover cropping will not, fungicide application will also not encourage soil degradation. So the answer is bush burning. Once the vegetative cover of trees and grasses are removed as a result of bush burning, that could lead to soil degradation. This question says the removal of topsoil from a small area of soil surface due to the impact of raindrop is known as A, sheet erosion, B, real erosion, C, gully erosion, and D, splash erosion. So the answer is D, splash erosion. This question says the following farming practices expose the soil to agents of erosion except A, bush burning, it exposes, land clearing, B, also exposes, C, crop rotation, and D, we have overgrazing, which also exposes the soil to agents of erosion. So the answer is C, crop rotation. does not expose the soil to agents of erosion. Thank you for participating in today's class. You can practice more questions using the Examguide app. The app scores and gives a detailed explanation of all the questions at the end of your practice test. You can learn a particular topic of interest with different modes like study mode, mock mode, and practice mode. It also has other features that make learning fun. It is a must-have for all serious students. Download from www.examguide.com if you don't have it yet. See you in the next class. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share the video to people that would benefit from it.